Hello, hello. This is Ben Zion of Ben Zion 2020 and the Futurist New Deal, doing a Futurist New Deal podcast special edition on the postmortem of the second of the Democratic debates, the first day of those, and I hope people did get a chance to watch that. It was a pretty riveting debate. I have been following all of these Democratic campaigns from the beginning, and I'm interested in seeing what's happening with the second half of this debate coming up. I think a lot of you are already talking about that and commenting about that. Keep it up. The debate was something that I predicted months ago actually happened, which is that something that Elizabeth Warren would say would literally be the death knell to someone's campaign, at least one person. Elizabeth Warren is an incredible policymaker and incredible campaigner. Some people that I know and people that I trust very well criticize her for being not the dyed-in-the-wool reformer that Bernie Sanders would be. And I don't know that that's true. But it's certainly a credible position. But what is true is that she's definitely representing humane economic policy reforms from a position of that's very well articulated as to reforming capitalism. And this is the model that does exist in the larger world. There are many of these social democracies, but they all have marketplaces. This is the developed world, and some blend therein seems to be the approach. I resist the idea of discussions ad nauseum of what socialism is or isn't, and it's allowing this, right-wing talking points was the phrase that was echoed a few times by Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders in this debate, and it's a good point. And people are saying after this debate and the kind of action that we saw from these two candidates particularly, that this is a solid ticket. And of course people have been saying this for 10 years, that this would be a solid ticket. People were saying it in 2015 and 16 particularly. People were saying it in 2018 and 19 now. It would be a very solid ticket. Irrespective of whether Trump is swirling the bowl, whether Trump is standing aside as a candidate, which I might be inclined to believe, whether Trump will be in jail, which I would certainly like. These two candidates would be a very much of a force to be reckoned with in terms of nullifying another Christo-fascist administration, or in terms of almost any context. So I am always trying to encourage people to talk in these kind of specific terms about what these two campaigns represent and stay above the noise and the fray in that regard. A little quick shout out to an interview I did yesterday with Emmanuel Morel, a congressional candidate in Florida's 20th district, a brilliant man and reformer who is doing the Lord's work down there in southern Florida on behalf of pro-worker initiatives in all manner of ways and pro-democracy reforms in Florida. Florida is one of those states, like Texas, like a few others, and unfortunately, to a high degree, the entirety of the United States, where outside watchdog agencies, they look at what's happening with voter suppression and voter participation and a whole host of concerns around dark money, and they say, sorry guys, you don't have a democracy anymore. That's true in Florida. That's true in Texas. That's true at the national level to a very high degree. And this is the actions of the rank-and-file Democrats and the vile Republicans. And we need to we need to be able to step up a little bit and do a little bit better. I was just having a conversation with James Roop and with Sam Golden and a few other people on this same thread about Emmanuel Morel's a post. And we were talking a little bit about the kinds of strategies that people on the right take. They have a talking point based strategy. They're kind of conditioned very quickly to play dumb and make you waste time with describing ideas that you don't really need describing. And that's something that people on the left who are maybe sometimes a little smarter, but they're very quick to kind of get drawn into this kind of knee-jerk political theater. It doesn't serve our ends as well as some other kind of approaches might. So we have to kind of think about this. I think about this even in the context of Elizabeth Warren versus Bernie Sanders. So Elizabeth Warren has a big network. Bernie Sanders has a huge network. Some people in that Sanders network, they despise Elizabeth Warren. Bernie Sanders doesn't despise Elizabeth Warren. So you have to wonder a little bit whether some of this is an echo chamber effect, whether some of this is a literal paid troll effect. Paid trolls are coming from different places, mostly from corporations, to be honest. Corporatists generated a lot more disruption in the form of Cambridge Analytica and these analogs to Cambridge Analytica that were very influential, coming from people like Charles Koch, Peter Thiel, Steve Bannon, Alex Jones, all of these influence operations that don't have policy goals in mind, just trying to confuse people so that they can advance a corporatist agenda. If you consider these corporatist maneuvers that are being made to be policy, then God love you. But there's this army of trolls out there, and they're getting you to engage in these partisan tropes. They're getting you to really argue and nitpick constantly the difference between what Elizabeth Warren's platform represents, a reformed capitalism, and what Bernie Sanders' platform represents, social democracy. And then that point of defining a small part of the left and getting people lost in the weeds in those discussions isn't advancing our agenda as quickly as framing the debate around the fake center and these extreme humane economic policy failings. Economic policy failings that are leading to thousands and thousands and thousands of deaths. I said this recently. Noam Chomsky, a guy who never met a hard leftist he didn't like, but he said in the wake of the 2016 election, we made a big mistake. All of you who voted for Trump over Clinton made a big mistake. And people are dying because of that mistake. There's 20 states that don't have Medicare expansions now, where hundreds of thousands of people have died because of your stupidity by voting for this con artist in the form of Donald Trump. And, we can talk about how bad Clinton was till the cows come home, but under that administration, there would still be certain labor protections in place that are now gone. There would still be certain more broad worker protections in place that are now gone. There would still be safety net features that are now gone. There would be expanded Medicare for all initiatives in various ways. So that represents, tens of thousands of people who have died because we're a bunch of schmucks who can't see the difference between a sham populist and a real populist like someone like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders. And, I'm not going to tell people that you have to have a truce between the Warren and Sanders campaign, because honestly, there's good reason for pushing a left agenda in as vociferous a way as you would. But I would tell you just to be aware that there's people out there who would manipulate you. And these people have a very calculated and almost scientific approach to wasting your time, and that you should try and adjust your strategies to keep these paid trolls and these bots and these people that just are real people. An awful lot of them are also real people, but they don't have specific policy goals in mind. You should have specific policy goals in mind and be talking about those things. You know, the reason that I want to see a Warren administration is the same reason I want to see a Sanders administration. It's the same reason I want to see an Andrew Yang administration. I regard a basic income to be the most progressive of these in certain respects. And a couple of people from left news magazines have written articles on this subject. Harm reduction. We're by disregarding the concerns of our middle class and allowing regulators and lawmakers to act at the behest of lobbyists alone and special interests more broadly alone. We've done a great disservice to the public health of this country, to the human development and quality of life of this country, and to such a degree that now everything we should do should be about harm reduction, should be about not sliding further and further away from these ideals, to being, not to be crass, but a third world country. That's not acceptable. It's not acceptable for a country that has $14 trillion GDP, by far the largest in the world, to be a haven for kleptocrats, where people don't have even the political will to pull their heads out of their asses, much less to advocate for humane economic policies. And we have to stay on point with that. So the debate began at 8 p.m. last night, the first day of the debate. It ended at around 10:40 p.m. There was a lot of people saying good things. People are saying that Elizabeth Warren won the debate. People are saying that Bernie Sanders won the debate. I'm inclined to think that any kind of showing of this kind, certainly the Sanders camp, comes out on top. A Sanders organization, whether Bernie Sanders gets a big bump, it seems unlikely that will happen. Marianne Williamson, the sort of Oprah Winfrey proxy in the race, and a charming person and a spiritualist, and a person who is, to her credit, besides, very much a booster of humane economic policies. The subject of reparations came up and was very well articulated. I think maybe some thousands of people now, in the day after, are having conversations around the water cooler where they're considering the moral exigency and relevancy of reparations for slavery. This is not solely a public policy matter. This is a just thing to do. Black folks, in the wake of the 2009 financial crisis, folks in general were not represented by the efforts that were made to control that. Trillions of dollars in quantitative easing was done so that guys like Dick Cheney, who own a bunch of multi-million-dollar homes, wouldn't lose any value in those homes. And on the flip side of that coin is then that housing costs are maintained at an artificially high level, and at the same time, more than half of the people in this country working in low-paying service jobs, working at Walmart, McDonald's, and so forth, earning artificially low wages. Those wages have been maintained by policy at an artificially low level. So the economy was weakened in a sense with this quantitative easing, and weakened in other senses with other bailouts for big industries. Maybe a little bit of focus on the human development and on the middle class, even at the cost of Wall Street. This is worthwhile. Andrew Yang talks about the real economy, and he's articulated metrics to this end to a high degree. He's talked about how we can't just focus on Wall Street, and we can't just focus on markets where it's easy to track the fiscal implications, because a lot of human endeavor is taking place in other disciplines and other spheres. People just taking care of their families, and a whole host of other things that are not wholly monetized. So we have to be aware of that. In a hyper-capitalist society, in a corporatist oligarchy like ours is moving so close to becoming, this is effectively a system of a set of systems of state-run capitalism that we have in the U.S. And it's so easy if people are removed from the equation in making these decisions to disregard the necessity of thinking about the real economy in Andrew Yang's terms, the human development concerns, the strengthening of the middle class, and this situation doesn't need to come to a head, and yet we have a political system that is forcing it to a head by having unyielding corporatism on the part of the two-party system. The rank-and-file Democrats would gladly lose elections before having to consider any reforms to this government by the lobbyists and for the lobbyists, and it's a horror. It's nothing short of a horror. Last night, Steve Bullock, not my favorite guy, he was in this campaign. I would have much rather seen another dark horse candidate joining these debates, Mike Gravel. But guys like Steve Bullock and John Delaney and Hickenlooper, these guys definitely didn't win the debate. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. But there was that moment again where Elizabeth Warren said, "What's the point of going to all of this trouble to run a political campaign for president if all you're going to say is the things that we can't do or shouldn't accomplish or could never hope to achieve?" And I'm paraphrasing there. I'm not looking at the quote. But it was a brilliant moment. And literally, there was then a Wikipedia edit, a comedy Wikipedia edit of John Delaney saying that he died on stage. John Delaney, dead July 30th, 2019, at the Democratic debates. Pretty funny and pretty true. People are talking a little bit about Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I don't like him that much. I put him somewhere on the spectrum of someone like Kamala Harris, who I think they are. People talk about they're concerned that Elizabeth Warren is a shapeshifter, but these two are definitely shapeshifters, not in the Alex Jones sense, but in the sense of being politically amorphous. And, people like to talk about how Pete Buttigieg is a smart guy. He's an excellent speaker, but, he's a smart guy to my mind in the way that Tucker Carlson is a smart guy. He's good. He's good at manipulating people. That's not the kind of smart guy that I'm going to be following to a lot of campaign events. But I can see the value in his candidacy in certain respects, just as I would, still support the now defunct campaign of Eric Swalwell on a certain basis, or the the other one issue candidates in the race who may not be on my point of the political compass, but still have something important to add to this discussion. This conversation came up recently in talking about this gun buyback. Also came up in the context of this of my own debate with Florida congressional candidate Emmanuel Morel. We were talking about how we still need to have the will to reverse these gun safety issues. You know, there was a huge spike since the mid 1990s in gun fatalities when assault weapons were brought back on the market that used to be illegal. You know, people actually used to be kind of sane in this country. Before 1974, it was illegal to profit from healthcare in this vast corporatist way, with huge golden parachutes to big pharma, huge golden parachutes to insurance executives. This for-profit model for healthcare, it represents deaths. Every one of those golden parachutes represents hundreds or thousands of people who died and didn't get the care that they needed because of our callousness as a people and because of not having the political will to demand a country that is not for the lobbyists and by the lobbyists. And there was Warhawk discussions. Elizabeth Warren is sort of the mirror image in some way, the reverse mirror image of the way that Donald Trump or Ted Cruz talk in the 2016 election debates. She says that the U.S. will not use nuclear weapons preemptively. These guys said that they're going to make the Middle East glow. Destroy the earth, that's good. If you destroy the earth, then Jesus comes back. These are insane people who say these things. These are people who should be in a rubber room drinking pudding through a fucking straw. And you know this about these Christo-fascists. And you're still coddling these people. You're still not challenging them. You're still not saying, this is insane. This idea of this corporatist country under this Christo-fascist aegis. This is something out of a Margaret Atwood book. This is something out of a dystopian film. And but let's wait and see what happens. Maybe it won't be that bad. No, it's already bad. It already represents a dramatic loss of life. I talk about a basic income. In 1969, Richard Nixon, not the best president ever, but did some things differently from more recent presidents on certain areas. You know, it's a different time, and he nearly got past a basic income that would have been roughly equivalent to the basic income of Andrew Yang. Let's say a $250 payout per week to every person in the United States, adjusting for inflation, to every adult, and that's approximately 1/4 of my Futurist New Deal basic income, which is funded from the federal land dividend. But I digress. So in Richard Nixon, he nearly passed a basic income, and had he done that, had that not been removed from consideration by Democrats, what was the reason that Democrats didn't want this basic income? It's not enough. That's a nonsense reason. It's not enough. There's millions of your friends and loved ones, U.S. citizens, who would still be alive today if we didn't have this logical fallacy about we can't provide basic services to people unless we can provide them at the highest level. We provide them at the level that we can. We do what we can, and we build from there. Richard Nixon's basic income would have saved hundreds of thousands of lives in that decade, hundreds of thousands more in following decades. There would still be 1 million people walking around in the sunshine, hugging their grandkids, having a nice time. And you know what happened to those people instead? They became homeless, and they died, and they didn't have a funeral. They didn't have an estate. And these are not people who are a piece of shit on your shoe. They're people who would have made a contribution had they been given half a chance. Now they're gone. Some other Warhawk through the looking glass talking points in yesterday's election that I thought were of interest. There was talk about defense spending. We've spent $5 trillion on wars in the Middle East just in recent years. This is Bernie Sanders, and this is you can look this up on PolitiFact. It's not exaggeration. There's 1 or 2 points that have been said to be exaggerated. Bernie Sanders talking points. The one particularly was that 49% of new money in the economy is going to the 1%. There's different ways of looking at that, but that number could be a little inflated. I read another study that said it would maybe be a little closer to 20 to 30%. That's still the vast majority of wealth in this country going to multimillionaires and billionaires. We need to consider these other folks as well. And Marianne Williamson talked a little bit about forgiving college debt, free college education. This came up in my talk with Emmanuel Morel. This has come up in talks with other Justice Democrats that I've had over the years. This is a worthwhile undertaking. Adding means testing to this equation may be a value in some limited cases, but I think overall it's not. And that's my feeling on a basic income as well. A good example is if you'll forgive a parallel analogy, is municipalities that have, in order to be more green, have included free transportation as a part of living in that city. So there's some cities in France, some other European locales, pretty good-sized cities have implemented this. You don't have to pay to get on the bus. You don't have to pay to get on the subway. Oh, wow, okay, that's weird. But a lot fewer people are driving. That's a lot less pollution in the city. A lot less money is being spent on other remediation to keep people healthy, just for something like that. But more to the point, as to my analogy, a lot of the cost of running these administration and these things comes from the systems of charging people and from personnel in general. So you can automate these systems now. You can have a train that runs without really humans as directly in the loop driving the train. You can have buses that are starting to do this. If you remove these personnel from equations generally in a corporation, you have costs remaining at a high level. That's not great. But in a municipality, you can use this high level of automation to bring things down to the level of being a free good. And in this case, you can get pretty close to that. You can never get fully there, but the benefits are worth it. In the context of a basic income, or particularly in public education, this benefit can be very well seen. If you go to a state college, if you look at actually the budgets for that, a lot of the money in the administration of the college is spent on charging people to go to the college. That's that's a vulture capitalism kind of manifestation. That's like a cop in the middle of BF Idaho, sitting there and speed trapping people all day, just so that cop will have a job, just so that this kind of otherwise pointless law enforcement agency can exist. That's not a good use of public funds. That is a nuisance economy. And there's a lot of things like that to some degree are on this spectrum in public policy and in marketplaces. Also not always really optimized to actually help people. But I digress. The Pete Buttigieg does say some pretty powerful things, and I've said before that I don't want a candidate who is this culture warrior, unless sort of representing for LGBT people, unless that person is really actually a reformer. It just irritating social conservatives, but not really doing anything else. That seems like more like a Koch network strategy than an actual reform strategy, and that's why Pete Buttigieg is not my favorite guy. But I mean, as a human being, I'm sure he's fine. But he said that the minimum wage is too low, and he referenced the Bible. Republicans are not following the teachings of the Bible and not following the teachings of Jesus Christ, which nearly 50% of people in the United States espouse to support, and yet a significant number of people who are the most vociferous of those followers are really in every way living in the opposite of those teachings, and that's a troubling situation. So there was a couple of attacks from John Delaney on Elizabeth Warren, on people to the left of himself. Those attacks, in looking at this debate, seem pretty hollow. It's another reason why we say that maybe John Delaney kind of died on stage. It's Tim Ryan, who's not one of the many people in this race who's polling pretty low. That said that there were 5 people in tonight's debate who have 0%, effectively less than 1% of polling, who are still on this debate stage. And okay, good. But Tim Ryan is kind of in that class. I put him more in the class of a Pete Buttigieg than a Hickenlooper or a Delaney, as a sort of, or Biden. Those last 3 these are blue dog Democrats. Tim Ryan's a little bit more of like a Pete Buttigieg kind of guy, but he talked about protectionism and talked about Trump's tariff war in glowing terms. He says that we need to be China hawks, and I mean, I don't know. I'm in a presidential debate where I was criticized on being not enough of a China hawk. And it's a fringe party, and it's a third party, the transhumanist party, but my competitor, hey, maybe she has a point. I don't think that supporting Republicans doing pretty insane things that have tremendous implications for world markets and having a negative impact on U.S. markets is the smartest thing to do for Tim Ryan. But there you have it. There's certainly concerns in all of our futures about dealings with China. Well, so the two main discussions in this debate really revolved around Medicare for all and a healthcare reform. That was approximately a quarter of the debate. And there was a little more talk about gun safety measures in the wake of the Gilroy massacre, which was perpetrated by someone whose heart was consumed by racial hatred. Yet another in this vast majority of people, not only who are right-wing terrorists, but who are people who are being radicalized by Donald Trump, an insane and worthless man. We need to stop telling ourselves that oh, this is a sad story, but we could never fix this. You know, that's not what Republicans said when they snuck assault weapons back into U.S. society. That's not what Republicans said when they suppressed all of the studies that describe gun violence as a public health concern. They didn't say they weren't telling themselves, "Oh, this is a sad situation that there's not enough guns in the United States, but what could we ever do?" Now, these are duplicitous Machiavellian characters, and you need to stop being a bunch of sad sacks and get to the next protest that's going on in your town and your city. Get out there and do something. I broke down a few minutes ago talking about the people who had passed because of inhumane economic policies, and how they should still be alive. How this is not just an act of God. This is a failing of our society. But it's not just a failing of politicians. It's your failure. It's my failure. We did not help them. We did not think it was worth it to preserve our middle class and civil society in the right way. And now we are paying the consequences for it. And we will continue to pay the consequences for these things as long as a solid majority or solid plurality of people are saying things like, "This is very sad, but what can anyone do about this?" Fuck you if you're a person who says that. And when someone says that to you, tell them to go fuck themselves. This is not a joke. This is life or death issues. You might not care about politics, but politics cares about you. There's no getting around it. You have to start thinking like a grown-ass adult. The Green New Deal, from a labor perspective and from an implementation of ending the climate crisis, stemming the tide of this, there's timelines for this around 2050 or 2030. There's quite a few Green New Deals, and they have varying languages. Some of them not so much about labor. The Green New Deal that was advanced by Ocasio-Cortez has language about a basic income and other labor protections. But that's not maybe the most controversial thing about it from the point of view of someone like John Hickenlooper. He doesn't like the Green New Deal. He says that we couldn't possibly regulate these things. Never mind that every other developed country regulates these things, just like Medicare for all. We couldn't possibly do this. This is wishful thinking. Every other developed country does this. It's not wishful thinking. You're just, again, as Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren would remind us, repeating mindless Christo-fascist talking points, playing to the dumbest people in the room, saying things that don't make any sense, but they're framed in such a way that they have a kind of internal logic. So people will say, "Oh, okay, yeah, I get it. We could never do nothing." And don't talk to dumb people. And not only don't talk to dumb people, but if a dumb person says something, say, "Hey, you're stupid. Maybe shut your fucking mouth." A lot of this problem stems from an inability to let the dumbest people in the room just run the table. There's 20% of people who would be in this country who would be described as right-leaning religious literalists in the Christian tradition. 20% of the people. And yet, what is the cabinet? people who pay lip service to Christianity, who are hard right leaning, not because they're Christians, but because they're multimillionaires and billionaires. What is much of Beltway culture? That very same thing. How is it that we've allowed this minority rule, which is not well-meaning, which its only agenda seems to be to enfranchise corporations and moneyed individuals at the cost of the rest of us, at the cost of the functioning of the civil society? How have we allowed this to happen? It's because you, when your idiot neighbor says, well, we could never do that, I don't think that this person is electable, you don't challenge them. You just say, okay, I'll talk to you later. And you should be telling them the ways in which that makes no sense, and redirecting the conversation to policy matters. So please, making jokes. There's lovely people in every part of the country. Let's not resort to tropes about toothless hicks, but still challenge these toothless fucking hicks. I'll say one last thing about Elizabeth Warren and the electability concern. This is a false narrative that's perpetuated throughout the rank and file of the Democratic Party. That our main concern is electability, and that is basically just code for honoring the will of the donors. Those donors will spend a lot of money to scuttle someone if they're not towing the line for this oligarchic system. And Elizabeth Warren is a very excellent legal mind and campaign strategy force to be reckoned with, and a very excellent lawmaker, a very excellent speaker, kind of the best of the best. So it's playing on all kinds of misogynistic ideas and just pointless ideas along the lines of what I just mentioned with the corporatist stuff, to say that she's not electable. I hope to see Sanders and Warren ticket in 2020. I think that it would be what's best for America. And if you got that impression in the course of this debate last night, my hat's off to you. Thank you very much.